the gravity of the responsibility was realized when you walked into the boardroom and you're there to make decisions, and the perspective you have to take shifts. Of course, I bring to the table my expertise and my perspective, but the decision-making and strategy behind it is really geared at sustaining the organization and moving us towards our mission, which is to advance excellence in oncology nursing and quality cancer care. Being able to reframe your perspective a little bit around those decisions is something that you don't realize until you're there to do that.
You're listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast, where ONS Voices talk cancer, a resource from the Oncology Nursing Society. Through conversations with subject matter experts, we examine the important issues in oncology nursing, from new treatments to patient-centered research to advancements in clinical practice. Join us as we hear from nurses in all facets of oncology care, from bench to bedside and everywhere in between. Welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. I'm Brenda Nevidjon, ONS Chief Executive Officer, and your host for the latest episode in our podcast series in getting to know your ONS board members. The previous episodes are linked in the episode notes, so take a listen to one of those as well. Today's newest board members, serving from 2024 through 2027, are Heidi Haynes, Ryne Wilson, and Susan Yackzan, and they're joining me to talk about their experiences in oncology and with ONS, their roles on the ONS Board of Directors, and the oncology nursing topics that they're passionate about. You can earn free NCPD contact hours by completing the evaluation we've linked in the episode notes. So please take advantage of that. Thank you for joining us today, Heidi, Ryne, and Susan. Let's begin the discussion with your career background in oncology nursing, or in nursing if you didn't begin in oncology nursing, and how it has shaped you into the nurse you are in your institution today. Heidi, would you like to start us off?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Brenda. This is such a wonderful opportunity to connect with our ONS community. My path to oncology was actually an accidental one. As a fairly new pediatric NP in primary care, I loved what I did, but I felt like I was still searching for my place. And deciding that the best answer to that was traveling and doing some locum tenens work, I thought that would provide an opportunity to have different experiences. So I took off on my adventures, and after a handful of assignments, I received a call. And yes, it was a call back then. It wasn't an email or a LinkedIn message, so I'm dating myself. The call was to see if I was interested in going to Children's Medical Center of Dallas to work as the advanced practice person for their neuro-oncology program. Working with this population, I quickly realized I really did find my home, and home not being Dallas, but my career home in oncology. I took off my traveling shoes and I stayed in Dallas for several years. And then the desire to be closer to home and family took me to Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh in that very same role. Years later, I transferred my oncology experience to an educator role in the pharmaceutical industry, most recently at Gilead Oncology. And I love my industry career as it not only allows me to broaden my knowledge in different disease states and help support optimal patient care through education, but the best part of it is that I get to travel around and meet and interact and collaborate with other oncology nurses over large geographies. And those relationships have allowed me to bring great insight back to my ONS role.
Ryne, you have a career path that's a bit shorter than Heidi's. So maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about yours and how you got into oncology nursing.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me. It's actually kind of funny. I was in undergrad at the time. People were always asking me, what kind of nurse are you going to be? What kind of specialty are you going to work in? And so one night in the library, I just Googled nursing specialties. And actually, the Oncology Nursing Society was one of the first things that showed up on that search. And I didn't even know what the word oncology really meant at that time. It was pretty early on my program. I looked more into it and realized it obviously was the care of people with cancer. And it struck my interest. And it just so happened that there was a nursing aide job at the local community hospital on the medical oncology unit. So I said, I'll try it out. It was kind of just happenstance, but it ended up being a really pivotal moment in my life to learn how special it is to care for people with cancer, and really drove a lot of passion and purpose behind all the work that I've done in nursing up to this point. After graduating from undergrad, I actually moved to Minnesota to start my career at one of the large NCI designated cancer centers in Minnesota. And I started on the inpatient medical oncology unit and hospice. And after working a few years there, I transitioned into a care coordinator, nurse navigator role for our oncology department, and focused on GI oncology, primarily hepatobiliary and pancreatic cancers, and found a lot of fulfillment in understanding the care trajectory from a broader perspective as opposed to more episodic experiences in the hospital, and found a lot of satisfaction in that role and really developed my expertise in oncology. And it was through ONS that I had the opportunity to kind of learn more and develop myself in that space as well. I quickly realized that there are a lot of structural barriers to people accessing the care that they need. And I wanted to be able to do more. And so I decided to go to grad school to get my DNP, but really focus on systems change and health policy. And so that's what I mostly focus on now. I'm now an academic, and I am a clinical assistant professor at the University of Minnesota, and I teach in our graduate programs. And I still have a clinical practice at one of our local hospitals here in the cancer clinic. I've found this transition also a great transition for me in helping navigate all the complexities of cancer care from a different perspective.
Susan, Heidi sort of tried out what her specialty was going to be and found it and found her home. And Ryne found it pretty early as an undergraduate and committed to it. So what's your story?
I found oncology nursing very early as well. I actually found my way in while I was still in nursing school. And I worked at Vanderbilt University Hospital for a summer between my junior and my senior year. And I was assigned to the oncology unit because the recruiter asked me where I wanted to go. And I said, I didn't care, but I wanted to be busy and challenged. And so she said, how about oncology? And I said, sure, I'll give it a try. And once I was on that unit, I knew that that was going to be my life's work. And truly, one of the primary reasons was the nurses, who were totally amazing. I love the science of it. I still do. I love the complexity of the treatments and the symptom management. And I love the relationships with the patients and families. And that's what the universal truth is about oncology nursing. So everything just gelled for me. I got married and moved to St. Louis, where my husband had a job, and we were there for 13 years. And I had 3 little boys while we were there and worked the whole time. And then we moved to Kentucky to be closer to extended family. But along the way, I have a lot of different experiences. How I've worked inpatient and outpatient as a staff nurse, got a master's degree, and I've been an oncology clinical nurse specialist in 2 different states. I've worked in 3 different states total, 5 different cancer programs. Vanderbilt, St. Thomas Hospital in Nashville, St. Louis University Hospital, and in Lexington, University of Kentucky and Baptist Health Lexington. I worked with adult patients all that time in medical oncology, hematology, GYN oncology, surgical oncology with radiation patients. I did a little stint in critical care to make myself a better bone marrow transplant nurse, and then in blood and stem cell transplantation. I found my way into a lot of leadership positions. So my current position is the Director of Service Line Performance Management at the University of Kentucky. Before that, I was the Associate Vice President for the Baptist Health Kentucky non-hospital cancer service line. I've been the Director of Infusion Department, clinical staff in clinic, and way back when, the Assistant Head Nurse on the Inpatient Medical Oncology and Transplant Unit in St. Louis. So the consistent theme for me has really been medical oncology, contact with oncology patients, and this amazing relationship with patients and the complexity of care and the science of what we do.
Well, you all have given such a kaleidoscope kind of picture of what oncology is and all the different settings and patient populations and all that oncology nurses work with. I bet listeners can find something in each of your stories that relates to their story too. So let's talk a little bit about your involvement with ONS. Do you remember what your first experience with ONS was, and how has your time in ONS, your history within ONS, and how you participated, how did that lead you to say, I think I'd like to put my name in for the board of directors? So Ryne, let's begin with your story.
throughout my entire career, I've been a member of the Oncology Nursing Society, and actually before my career started. So I started out as a student member at part of the Bluegrass chapter. I went to undergrad in Kentucky, not too far away from where Susan is. After graduating and moving to Minnesota, I immediately joined the Southeast Minnesota chapter of the Oncology Nursing Society and served on the board in a few different positions as membership chair and as the legislative liaison for the chapter as well. And I had the opportunity to go to my first ONS Congress. That really opened my eyes to all of the possibilities and all the really incredible work that so many of our colleagues across the country have been doing, which really was inspiring and really made me want to do more. I took on more volunteer opportunities within the society, things like the OCN Passing Score Task Force with ONCC, as a biomarker database expert reviewer, the Symptom Intervention Guidelines reviewer, and several other volunteer opportunities just to stay connected and build relationships, but also give back to the profession that had really given so much to me. But it really was the experience I had in a pilot program called the Young Leaders Program that was sponsored by the Leadership Development Committee that really turned a corner for me and made me feel like I was ready. I had reached a developmental milestone to put my name in the ring for national service on the board. And it was my mentor, Dr. Chip Bailey, that really saw something in me and encouraged me to take this on. And the rest is history. And here I am.
As they say, the rest is history. Susan, how about you? How did you first engage with ONS?
I will say first something about mentors. When I was in nursing school and wandered into that first oncology unit, there was a CNS there who changed my life as far as what I wanted to be. And she was a member of ONS. So from almost the same time that I knew that I wanted to be an oncology nurse, I knew that I wanted to join the Oncology Nursing Society. And then from that hospital, I actually worked at St. Thomas Hospital with Teresa Knoop, who you all know, who was on the board recently. And Debbie Wujcik was my oncology CNS. And I can still remember when Debbie went to ONS Congress and came back and told us about it. Again, it was just absolute confirmation. When I moved to St. Louis, joined the chapter there, and my mentor there was Suzanne Mahon, who many people know from, genomics expertise. She leads us forward in that area. But I remember when I finished my master's degree, I was accepted to present my abstract at ONS, and it was at the Congress, and it was in San Diego that year. And Suzanne was the person that taught me that I should have approximately one slide per minute and helped me rehearse and taught me how to do that. She also helped us publish as a chapter. So we did a chapter project about safe handling. We did a survey, and we all went to her house and we wrote that article together and published it. I really can't say enough about mentors along the way. And then when I moved to Lexington, this is no joke. We were moving into our house and the movers were carrying boxes in. And I was on the phone with the local chapter president here in Lexington, Kentucky at the Bluegrass chapter to find out when the next meeting was. That's how important ONS has been to me. When thinking about going into board service, Ryne summed it up perfectly. It was about just thinking and reflecting on my career and thinking about what I had to give back and to try to afford other people the same opportunities that I'd had and the wonderful mentorships that I've had and what I've gained from this organization. So I really felt like it was time for me to give something else back.
We hear that often, that is a pivotal moment when people are ready to take that step, and often see that you all have given back in many ways, even before board service. But there's a pivotal moment when I'm ready for this. Heidi, how about you?
My involvement in ONS, I'm sure you're not surprised, also took a non-traditional path. Upon entering industry, I quite frankly was seeking a way to remain relevant and stay connected to my colleagues and really to preserve my oncology nurse identity. I felt like I was going to lose that. A colleague encouraged me to join my local ONS chapter. So I went to my first meeting, I'll never forget. And I remember being shy and quiet and thinking, oh goodness, I don't belong here with all of these amazing oncology nurses. But I was welcomed by all the nurses in attendance and the ONS board members that were in attendance. And I was just hooked from that time on. And why I originally sought something for myself, I found that as I continued going to the meetings, that I really developed a passion for supporting other oncology nurses. The leadership of the Pittsburgh chapter was very important in fostering that interest. And I'm sure you can guess that they gave me plenty of things to do to help support our local chapter. I found myself on the chapter board and eventually in the role of president. And during this time, I will always be grateful. We're talking about mentors. I will always be grateful for Dr. Laura Fenimore's mentoring. And she encouraged my confidence in the skill sets that I had developed, not only from my clinical background, but also in my non-traditional oncology nurse role. So that gave me the confidence to pursue a position on the national board. And since stepping into those leadership roles, I found that the greatest sense of accomplishment and the greatest sense of fulfillment has been for paying it forward and talking with and encouraging those other potential nurse leaders in our ONS community.
So I want to throw in an extra question here before we move on. In your time thus far, you've been on the board a little over 6 months or just around 6 months. What has surprised you about what your role is on the board, the things that the board discusses? Heidi, you were just finishing your discussion about your role in ONS. Why don't you go ahead and start on this one?
First, I should have said it up front, I want to say how grateful I am to be allowed this amazing opportunity to serve our oncology nurses on the national level. But speaking of national, in these few short months, what not necessarily surprised, but what I've been learning is how to transfer that passion and leadership experience that I learned at the local level and grow them into bigger picture skills, sort of switching my hat and supporting our oncology nurses on a more of a global level. For those, I would say for those interested in a national board position, but unsure how they would navigate being new to the role, I can tell you the personal support of new board members has been wonderful. Brenda, you and the more senior members of the board and the national ONS team have all been welcoming and willingly share their knowledge. We even get assigned a board buddy. And I have to give a shout out to my board buddy, Trey Woods, who has graciously, more than graciously, put up with all of my questions and pestering along the way. And much like the local chapter level, you might be familiar with the process that each board member is involved in a committee. And I've had the honor of being part of the board development committee, which involves things such as assessment and development activities, among many other things, as well as ongoing support. So these first few months have really flown by. I can't wait for the months ahead and what I might learn along the way and what we might accomplish as a board along the way.
Susan, what may be something that you weren't expecting or that you find is very familiar coming onto a board, maybe similar to what you did experience at a chapter level?
Well, the health of the organization is a responsibility. So that's what you're giving yourself over to and the task, so the chapter board is just on a much more local and scaled back level. I mean, this reaches a different proportion. So, it's not that it was a surprise. I just think the full impact of it sort of comes to you when you're in the board meeting and you're thinking through those things. The budget committee is one of the committees that I'm on, and I'm happy to report that we're very healthy. And that's because of great stewards who came before me. And so, like everybody else on the board, we feel the impact of making sure that continues because oncology nursing is essential. We must continue to go forward. It's too important work. Why you kind of know that? I think there's a moment of realization, just like anything you do. Nursing is no different. When you start in nursing or you start a new role, you have that moment of realization. Like, I'm the person making this decision. I can remember that moment for me as an advanced practice nurse when I was alone in a clinic and there was an emergency happening. Everybody was turning to me and I was like, oh, okay, I'm in charge. I get this. And so it's just the impact moment. Not that it was a surprise, but what I'm so thankful for, is the support of everybody who's around me. So I would echo what Heidi said about you, Brenda, and Jessica McIntyre, who's a phenomenal president of the board. My board buddy is Susan Brown. Just, everybody is willing to bring everything they have to what we're doing.
Just something that listeners may not be aware of is what is very important in the governance of the organization is the partnership between the board and the executive. And that's been my privilege for over 10 years now to be in that position. And what they also don't necessarily know is you're my boss. The board is my boss. I'm employed by the board. And as in any work environment, you evaluate me. We have those goals that we set and performance I'm expected to bring with the staff to what you all set as the strategic priorities. And then the budget versus a chapter budget. You probably saw a few more commas and zeros when we were dealing with the budget. Ryne, how about you?
I echo a lot of what Susan and Heidi have said. I'll add, again, I don't know that it necessarily was a surprise, but I think the gravity of the responsibility was realized when you walked into the boardroom and you're there to make decisions, and the perspective you have to take shifts. Of course, I bring to the table my expertise and my perspective, but the decision-making and strategy behind it is really geared at sustaining the organization and moving us towards our mission, which is to advance excellence in oncology nursing and quality cancer care. Being able to reframe your perspective a little bit around those decisions is something that you don't realize until you're there to do that. One other thing that's been surprising to me, or somewhat surprising, is learning more about the history of the organization and the sustained impact really that it has had over these last almost 50 years. Learning more about those things that have happened in our history that have really transformed cancer care and put us at the decision-making table in a lot of other areas has been really great to learn. The other thing I'll mention is that all the work that happens behind the scenes with the ONS staff is quite remarkable and incredible. We have an incredible staff team that supports our organization and is also strongly committed to the mission of the organization. And that's been a very pleasant surprise.
You nailed it on the head. The staff who are distributed throughout the country. We're not just Pittsburgh based anymore, as many members may think. We're all still in Pittsburgh, but staff are throughout the country. And we're very, very fortunate about the commitment and the talent of the team that we have that works with, obviously, volunteers in so many different capacities, many of which you described. I should mention too, Ryne, that you mentioned the history. You're on the 50th anniversary committee that has been planning things for the next year. People should stay tuned for the beginning of 25, and you'll start seeing some very interesting kinds of recognitions, different ways coming out about our 50-year history. Now, as we prepared for this episode, we asked each of you to identify a topic that you're passionate about so listeners could get a deeper understanding of maybe what that topic is and your interest, commitment to that topic. And Heidi, you talked about your interest in fertility preservation. So would you like to expand upon that?
When the request came out, it didn't really take long for me to identify that topic of fertility preservation. I've already shared my clinical experience has been with the pediatric neuro-oncology program in a couple different institutions. So let me paint a picture for you. Imagine being told your child has a brain tumor, and regardless of their age, your head is swimming with all the information around diagnosis, treatments, and prognosis. And often the decisions a family has to make at this time are urgent, and they don't allow a lot of time for reflection. Side effects and safety information have already been discussed, but it's all a whirlwind. And then once that whirlwind starts to settle down, you start to consider the future beyond surviving just the immediate present. As a couple of you have spoken to already, our science is advancing at accelerated rates, and survival rates are continuously being extended out. So that future might now mean that a patient is able to build their own family someday. So fertility preservation conversations are important in providing that option. Not only that, but also being confident and knowledgeable about the resources to make in a timely manner, make those referrals in a timely manner is just as equally as important. So giving patients opportunities for building their own families, it can actually be a gift in what otherwise might cause significant distress later on. The joint positions statement between APHON, CANO, and ONS was such an important piece of work. It helps provide standard of care guidelines around fertility preservation itself. And this topic also recently gained additional attention at the joint session of CANO's annual meeting, which recently took place. And I've also had the personal opportunity to work with our ONS secretary, who is Deborah A.K. Hutt Allen, and Gigi Robinson on the fertility preservation session that will be highlighting at our 2025 ONS Congress. So I think I just gave a bit of information away, but this session will address the clinical as well as the advocacy aspects of fertility preservation and help oncology nurses use the position statement to guide their own patients. So be sure to join us for this hot topic and don't miss out on this conversation.
Thank you, Heidi. For the listeners, APHON is the Association of Pediatric Hematology Oncology Nurses, and CANO is the Canadian Association of Nurses in Oncology. And it's an example of what we, ONS, do on behalf of you and your patients, and coming together with other organizations to develop these important position statements. So thank you, Heidi, for sharing about that. Ryne, you have had interest for a while now on the environmental health and the intersection of the environment and well-being. And certainly there are many things in the environment that are very germane in terms of cancer as well. So would you like to share a little bit about this passion of yours?
I'm very interested in understanding and frankly responding to some of the environmental impacts on cancer and cancer care. And in particular, I'm focused on understanding these impacts from climate change and the impacts of climate change across the cancer care continuum. So for example, myself and several other oncology nurse colleagues have come together to look at this topic, and we took some time to really try to understand the impacts of climate disasters on cancer care and cancer outcomes. We know that climate disasters are happening more intensely and with more frequency, and these disasters are having devastating effects on patients with cancer and their care providers. And so I believe that oncology nurses can play a critical role in helping to raise awareness about this issue and develop some of the sustainable solutions to help mitigate, adapt, and respond to these climate disasters. And it's important to know that ONS takes this seriously as well, and will be publishing, and maybe by the time this podcast is published, we'll have published an ONS white paper that summarizes the key considerations for oncology nurses as it relates to climate change and its impact on cancer across the care continuum. We hope that this publication is just the start of much more work that can be done on this topic. And while we recognize that this topic actually is not that new, and in fact, many of our Indigenous communities around the world have recognized these issues, it's time now for us to really start to take this work seriously as we move forward and build partnerships that promote inclusion, equity, and justice.
Thanks, Ryne. I think it's hard not to see some regular frequency. In fact, I saw in the news this morning devastation because of tornadoes in communities just over the weekend. So, Susan, you talked about your interest in transformative cancer care delivery, which is a very interesting topic, and really looking forward to sharing what that interest is and what you see as maybe something that's been transformative in your experience.
Transformative cancer care delivery really, to me, is care that's exceptional, it's patient-centric, and it's evidence-based. And it really means being ready to change and grow and learn and figuring out how to collaborate with others to create meaningful improvements in the delivery of care. And I think nurses are at the perfect place for this work to happen. So one of my favorite ONS volunteer stories goes way, way, way back to, we're going all the way back to 1998, when ONS put out a call for volunteers to develop what became the ONS chemotherapy and immunotherapy course. And back then it was called chemo and biotherapy course. And as I remember it, one nurse from each state went to Pittsburgh to participate in this weekend-long content development for what became the ONS course. And I had been teaching chemotherapy classes for a while. That was, the homegrown class that I had developed. And so I applied, and I was the nurse that went from Missouri. Interestingly, when I went, I was very pregnant. And I remember getting on the airplane and the way people looked at me. So I almost missed the cutoff for when I could fly. But I was the nurse from Missouri, and it was just, like many of my volunteer experiences in ONS, it was transformative for me as well. So I was one of 50 people, from all across the nation who had been, all of us were teaching chemo classes. I believe Dr. Margaret Bartenberg was the person who gave a class to all of us. And if you can imagine, we were all like cutting in and giving comments for the entire time that she did that. And we were doing that to develop, the best course that ONS could offer. But it was an amazing experience. But what came out of that was chemotherapy course trainers across the nation who taught the ONS chemotherapy and, like I said, biotherapy course way back then. But the important part, getting back to transformative cancer care and evidence-based care, is that it was evidence-based. When we taught about symptoms, we taught a course that had been peer-reviewed, supported by the evidence, and was always updated. And so it wasn't my 2-day homegrown course, which I think was pretty good. This was better. And so it was really responsible for, I think, something that changed oncology nursing. So it was an Oncology Nursing Society evidence-based practice course that was the same. You could take it from different trainers, but the content was developed in such a way that it provided essential didactic components for what really any nurse should know when they're giving chemotherapy. So I think I taught that. I was trying to think back, at least 4 different states. At one point, I tried to think about how many different people had taken the course from me, and it's literally at least 200, it's probably more. And in Lexington, when I moved back to Lexington, there were 3 other trainers that lived here in Lexington, and we developed a consortium course, and that was one of the best things. So instead of participants coming in hearing from me for 2 days, which is way too much, they heard from 4 different people who worked at 4 different places, but all delivered that content. And it was one of the best things that we did. And we did it really through our chapter resources. I still value that. I think it's online now, but it's still the go-to thing for every institution. And if it's not, it should be, for what should be the basic information for any nurse that's giving chemotherapy. We have a position statement that talks about, what is the essential component for people to know before they give chemotherapy. But it's ONS asking for expertise from their members to participate in production of an evidence-based transformative care delivery change. And, it just sums it up so nicely for me for the work that we can do as nurses.
That's a great example, and how you talked about that, from the collaboration across 50 states to the local collaboration of 4 organizations. I mean, there's been a theme. What you all are talking about. You've talked about mentors. You've talked about collaboration. I think that's some of the strength that a professional home gives us, that it connects us with other like-minded, evidence-based directed individuals to develop programs, position statements, courses, conferences that can be transformational at the individual level, like you talked about, but also in the bigger picture as well. So you all have done tremendously in terms of pulling your histories and your current experiences on the board, and such wonderful stories, painting the picture, as you said, Heidi. So we're coming to the end, and it's an opportunity for any last minute thoughts you might have, any kind of things you might want to share with members who are listening to this podcast. Any one of you, all of you. I'm not necessarily going to put you on the spot, just who might have some sharing last reflections.
I can say something about strategic planning. When I was preparing, I was trying to think about that. ONS has done strategic plans before. They're a healthy organization. That's part of a healthy organization, but we're about to embark on a new one. That is essential work for forecasting, where our resources and attention need to be understanding what our mission and vision and values are. I'm really looking forward to being part of that work.
That's work ahead of us with all 3 corporations, with ONS, but also with the Oncology Nursing Foundation and the Oncology Certification Corporation. So there's some really exciting work ahead of all the boards. By the time people hear this, we'll have done that work.
I just also want to say that I'm incredibly grateful to be part of this team and to be in this position and take my work very seriously, as I know all of us do. I just want to share a little bit of gratitude there. But the other thing I want to mention looking forward is actually the celebrations around the 50th. You alluded to this, Brenda, but I think this is going to be a really fun celebration next year. And I'm excited to be part of that celebration, as I'm sure all of our listeners are, to really reflect back on where we've been and where we're at now and where we can go in the future.
I think for me, Brenda, it's more of when I think about it, is a call to action. The board has so many important initiatives, or the ONS has so many important initiatives, such as the things that you just heard us speak about. But it's the collective whole that results in the sole focus of bringing oncology nursing forward that resonates for me. So if you share the passion in supporting your friends and your colleagues, don't hesitate to reach out to your local chapter, to your national ONS board members, or the ONS team at headquarters to learn more, because there's all kinds of ways to get involved and make a difference and make an impact and give back.
Well, thank you all. And you all certainly showcase that in your stories, all the different ways that you have been involved in the organization. And people can certainly find opportunities on the all-member community. We post information about volunteer opportunities. But as you said, there's lots of opportunities at the local level with chapters as well. Thank you to the three of you, but also thank you to the people who are listening. I would like to remind you, if you're listening to this, that you are able to get free NCPD for this podcast, and the information is in the notes for the podcast. And with that, thank you all for having joined us.
Thank you for listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. Tell us about your favorite part in this episode by leaving a review wherever you download your podcast. For more resources and information about oncology nursing, visit us at ons.org or voice.ons.org. The ideas and opinions shared in this episode represent those of the guest and not necessarily ONS.